Being here today. My name is James Fitzpatrick, and on behalf of Building America's Future, I'd like to welcome you to our ongoing America's Future Tour. It's a policy series launched late last year to address some of the most pressing and important issues of our time. The mission of Building America's Future is to inform and empower Americans to take ownership of our country's policy direction and demand that our government at all levels enact policy reforms to improve the lives of Americans and make America's future strong. Today, we are discussing taking on Washington, the Pennsylvania way. As a thought leader with deep experience in national security and international economic policy, we look forward to hearing from our special guest, Dave McCormick. We also want to give a warm Philadelphia welcome to U.S. Senator Joni Ernst. And with that, I'll turn things over to Drew Murray for some remarks and the beginning of our program. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Drew Murray, and I am a community leader who lives right here in Center City, Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love. I am here with Dave McCormick, Senator Joni Ernst, business leaders, community leaders, a former U.S. attorney, a former chief of staff of the Secretary of the Navy, and we are here to discuss taking back Washington and why that matters here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So with that, I'm going to turn it right over to Senator Ernst to get things kicked off here.
Yeah,
Thank you for
Drew.
coming, yes.
Oh my gosh, no, it is a pleasure to be with all of you here in Pennsylvania today. And Pennsylvania is so much like Iowa. We've just got great, hardworking folks out there. But what Iowans have recognized, and I know that this is true in Pennsylvania as well, is that our folks are seeing that Washington, D.C. is not working for them. And so we have to change that, and that's why I'm here supporting Dave McCormick for United States Senate, is because, and why we're doing this roundtable, is because we need leaders that will bring action into this cycle. And so Dave does have a plan to take Washington, D.C. back. It's going to shake things up. Now, I know a little bit about this. I'm going to challenge y'all, go back in time. And when I first came into the United States Senate, I wanted to make Washington, D.C. squeal. And we are doing that with the proper oversight and pushback of our agencies. So I've been actively engaged in a number of areas, and I'll give you a few examples. Of course, during COVID, all of us saw different agencies vacate their office buildings in Washington, D.C., right? Everybody was teleworking. When was COVID-19? I think that was in 2020, early 2021, right? The occupancy rate in Washington, D.C. at our federal agencies, physical occupancy of our agencies, not a single one of them is over 27% occupied. Most folks are still teleworking right now. Okay, it is time to get back to work. We know calls are going unanswered. Calls are going unanswered at the Social Security Administration. They're going unanswered at the Veterans Administration. People aren't getting the resources nor the attention they need from our federal government. So we are pushing back on that and demanding that telework end and we bring our workers back into those agencies. Now, another area, I know Dave will agree with this, is we've got too many agencies in Washington, D.C. I've had the Swamp Act. I introduced that a number of years ago. Move those agency headquarters out of Washington, D.C. Okay, so Iowa's big farm country. And the USDA is headquartered where? In Washington, D.C. Out of all of those thousands and thousands of federal workers at the USDA, I guarantee you those cubicles are filled with people that have never even stepped foot on a farm. They are writing rules and regulations that dictate to our farmers how they are going to farm, how they are going to raise livestock, and they really have never experienced it. So we need to focus on getting those agencies out into the communities that they represent. I think the headquarters should be out in maybe Iowa, Nebraska, Kansas, or maybe the Department of Energy should be here in Pennsylvania. So we've got a lot of work to do. We need Washington to work for the people. We should be serving the people. And that's why I'm really glad to be here, Drew. I think we've got a lot of work to do, and it starts right here. It starts right in Pennsylvania.
Absolutely. So Dave, I'm going to now pass it on to you and just give some of your thoughts going forward.
Thanks, Drew, and thanks to Building America's Future for hosting this great event. And Senator, thank you so much for being here in Pennsylvania. And honestly, for the topic of shaking up Washington, you could not find a better leader, a better role model than the senator here. And so when I'm in the Senate, I think I'll try to emulate you on all that you do to shake up Washington. And I come at this as a business person, someone who is an outsider, someone who's never held elected office. And it's easy to sort of get focused on the problems of the minute. And we have a lot of problems. We have sky-high inflation. We have a crazy wide-open border. We have all sorts of problems. But it's important to get to the root cause. Why is Washington coming up with policies? Why is it delivering such bad outcomes for our citizens? And that's one of the things that I have been trying to think about of what I can do when I go to the Senate. And there's three things that I think are fundamental root causes of what's going on that I think we need to address. And the senator talked about a couple of them. First, we got to change the culture in Washington. We got to change the culture. The idea that the people are sitting in these office buildings in Washington dictating policies for the rest of the country they don't know anything about is really a problem. So the Department of Energy in Pennsylvania, Ag in Iowa, these are just common sense things where the regulators, the policymakers are close to the issues and the people that their policies most affect. It's an obvious thing. Also, the most basic premise of business is that you need to be able to get the right people in the right roles. And so you need to have the freedom to make changes. In the civil service, someone's not working out, you need to have the freedom to get somebody who is working out. And so we don't have that luxury within our civil service. We can't hire and fire the people we need. And we need to do that if we're gonna shake up Washington. The second problem is this crazy growth of our administrative state. And the senator here is the ranking member of the Small Business and Entrepreneurship Committee. And she probably hears about it more than I do, but I hear about it everywhere I go. Every business leader I talk to, I say, what are your big problems? They say inflation, they say skilled labor, and they say regulations. Regulations skyrocketing out of control. When you're a regulator, particularly a regulator that's been there year after year, you're a hammer looking for a nail. How do I regulate the industry that I'm in? And those regulations are compounding, where they're placing a huge burden on our farmers, a huge burden on our business leaders. And so we need to have a process to constantly be whittling back our regulations, protecting our consumers, doing what regulations should do, but doing that in a way that unlocks the potential of our businesses, particularly small businesses, which account for 80% of the jobs in our country are from small businesses. This is the engine. And so two things. One, President Trump had this idea of for every new regulation that you introduce, you take back two. It's a great idea. That's one way to try to impose discipline. Another way is maybe an expedited process where those that are affected by regulations can challenge the regulator in an expedited way, in a very cost-effective way, to be able to force the regulatory agencies to prove that these regulations really make sense. And unfortunately, under President Biden, with Bob Casey's support, every step of the way, our regulatory agencies have become highly political, and they've been driving a political agenda. That's certainly what's happened in the Department of Energy. That's certainly what's happened in many of the regulatory bodies. Third thing is you got to change incentives. The most basic thing about running an organization and running the government is you got to change incentives. And we have a problem now, in my opinion, where Washington is self-reinforcing. The swamp is alive and well. And the senator's a relative newcomer to this, but I bet she would agree that you have the biggest industry for people who serve in government when they leave in elected office? Lobbying. Number one problem, right? Guess who had the highest performing portfolio in the last couple years for her stocks and bonds? Nancy Pelosi. That seems like there's something wrong there, that we ought to have constraints on how people can use directly or indirectly the information that they're associated with because of their role in government, so they don't get benefit from it that you don't get as an everyday citizen. And then the final thing, which is for me what I think makes sense, but also what I think should make sense across our elected officials, is term limits. I think we should have term limits. I'm going to term limit myself, and the reason for that is that I think our founders never believed that the idea was that people were going to spend their whole life in elected politics. They believed that people would go out and to be military officers, like the senator served honorably in combat and retired as a colonel. They would have careers, and then they would go to serve. That's what our founders had in mind. They didn't have this idea of career politicians like Bob Casey, 30 years in public office, going for his 4th term in the Senate. And so I think by getting fresh blood regularly, we can make sure we're always doing the people's business. The most important thing is to be associated with people who actually know what the effects of this are, the effects of government being out of control. So so glad to be on this panel with so many successful people from different perspectives, and glad to be here today, so thank you.
All right, thank you, Dave, and that's a great segue to our next portion here. I gave a kind of an overview of who was sitting at this table with me. Now, if I can ask, and I'm going to start with you, Lisa, if you can just introduce yourself, say where you're from, and then we'll go on to Bill, and we'll just go around the table, and everyone introduce themselves.
I'm Lisa Costanzo. I live in Northeast Philadelphia, right down the road, 5 minutes. I grew up here. This is a great neighborhood. I opened a small business in 1989, and I'm still going. We're still in business. So we help schools and small business and local organizations and things like that, supply them goods, and it's a lot of fun. I love it.
All right, great.
Yeah.
Bill?
I'm Bill McSwain. I'm a native Philadelphian, and I served as the U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Pennsylvania, which covers Philadelphia and the 8 surrounding counties from 2018 to 2021. So public safety is one of my passions, and I want to thank you, Joni, for being here and sharing your wisdom with us and being here to support Dave, and I'm delighted to be a part of the panel.
My name is Alicia Santucci. I'm with Santucci's Original Square Pizza. Our pizzeria franchise brand has been rooted here in Philadelphia for over 65 years. I am 3rd-generation business owner, and very humbled to be a part of the panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Good afternoon, Senator-to-be. Good afternoon, Senator. Mr. McSwain, I have to say hello to a former Marine, for sure. I'm an attorney. Started off as assistant district attorney here in Philadelphia. Spent some time going back and forth into federal service. Most recently, I had the privilege to work as the chief of staff to the 77th Secretary of the Navy. And I had a lot of interaction with the Senate Armed Services Committee, and it was great partnership there. So thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak with you.
Vincent Emmanuel, 7-Eleven franchisee since 1981. I'm a franchisee since, we have multiple stores. Over the time that restricted to the number of outlets we have. I'm also the official spokesperson for Delaware Valley Franchise Owners Association, which includes a lot of franchisees from all walks of life. We are in the front, we are right on the street. We see what's happening on a daily basis. And thank you that at least you're paying attention to the business people here.
Josh Novotny, sorry, 2nd Ward Republican Ward Leader, home of Santucci's, my favorite pizza place in the city. So happy to be here. Also talked to a lot of small businesses in my ward, which is kind of on the border of South Philly and Center City, and there's a huge disconnect between Washington and what really helps them in the city. So glad to be here to discuss it.
All right, great. Thanks, everyone. So we're going to jump in with the first question. So we are here in the city of Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love. We're known for a lot of things. We signed the Declaration of Independence here. We won the Super Bowl a few years ago. We have the World Cup coming. We're going to be celebrating.
I like how you put that one, like of equal.
I was going to say World Series, but I'm like, it was 2008, so that might be going back a bit too far, but we are going to win it this
Winning
year.
the Super Bowl
Yeah,
and
yes.
the Constitution.
It was, it signed Declaration of Independence, and then the Birds winning the Super Bowl. You know you're in Philadelphia, number one, if you say that second, and then you call them the Birds and not the Eagles. But unfortunately, we're also known for other things, and we're getting famous for other things that we don't want to be famous for. Kensington's one of them, lawlessness. So Dave, given your experience and your military background, I want you to talk a little bit about what's going on in these college campuses? I'm not going to call them protests. I'm going to call them encampments. And specifically, we have one right here.
Yeah.
A lot of press with the University of Pennsylvania. So why don't you give me your thoughts there?
Yeah, I went down 3 or 4 weeks ago. I went and visited the encampments at Penn, and I visited the encampments on University of Pittsburgh. And honestly, my most important reaction is one of sadness when you see what's happening in these campuses. These kids who are marching, they don't know the difference between good and evil. They don't know the difference between good and bad. And you see some of the horrific things that are being said, the violence that's being threatened, the intimidation that's happening. I had one of my supporters in University of Pittsburgh, had a McCormick hat on, walked past a line of protesters. Somebody grabbed him, pulled him down, tried to pull his backpack off his back. And you say, my God, and by the way, those same kids, there's some people, they aren't, most of them are not students, they're agitators from the outside. That generation is also only about a third of them think America's a great country. And so it's not just anti-Semitic, it's anti-American. And you say, how could that happen? And then you see these college presidents testifying, and they don't know the difference between good and evil. They don't know the difference between right and wrong. You say, that's how it happened. So we have a failure of leadership. We have a failure of leadership on our college campuses. We have a failure of leadership of many of our public officials. Bob Casey, most notably, has been a silent voice on this, has not stepped up and played a strong role. And we need to get back to our basics, which is the idea that we need to have law and order on our campuses. These campuses have policies, they just weren't enforcing them. Everybody has a First Amendment right. We need to support the First Amendment. It's not the First Amendment to be able to intimidate people or threaten violence. That's not the First Amendment. And we need to get back to reinforcing why America is a great country and help build that sense of love for America into our youth, starting in high school and then reinforcing on our university campuses. So we got a lot of work to do.
Absolutely. So I'm going to go to our former U.S. Attorney, Mr. Bill McSweeney. What are your thoughts on the campus and what's going on these campuses? And just honestly, overall, when you were U.S. Attorney, we called for your help oftentimes because we have a DA in Philadelphia who doesn't necessarily know what his job is. So we often called on you. What are your thoughts on what's going on college campuses and just in general in the city of Philadelphia?
Well, hopefully I answered that call.
Yes, you did, absolutely.
I do see some parallels between the summer of 2020 and what we saw on the campuses here this past spring, where I think it stems largely from a culture of lawlessness. And when you don't enforce the law, that tends to seep into all areas of society. And when it comes to the riots in 2020, you saw police cars torched, you saw police that were attacked, you saw buildings destroyed, and the U.S. Attorney's Office did step in to restore law and order there where we could. And when it came to the campus unrest, you see Jewish students harassed, Jewish students who are afraid to walk around campus, tolerating threats. You saw buildings taking over. Sometimes you saw when police would come in and try to restore order, you saw them attacked. And the protesters knew that there weren't going to be any consequences. They knew that because they had seen in the past that the DA in Philadelphia wasn't going to do anything about it. And that's exactly what happened this time as well. The DA refused to bring any serious charges against the people who had committed crimes on Penn's campus and Drexel's campus, for example. And some of these could even be considered hate crimes. If you're being targeted because of your religion, if you're being harassed and threatened because of your religion, that's very, very serious. It needs to be dealt with seriously. One of the things that I really appreciate about Dave is that he's been very clear about his support for the Jewish population in Pennsylvania, very clear about his support for Israel. Actually went to Israel after Christmas this past year with his wife, and has been very vocal. And you haven't seen that sort of vocal leadership from the administration in Washington. You have not seen that. It's been silent. There's a deafening silence. And so that's the kind of common sense leadership that Dave can bring to Washington, and we really need that. We need that because of public safety, and we need that for all other sorts of reasons, but we need change.
Absolutely, and I'm starting to hear a theme. I think I've heard common sense from every person who's spoken so far today. And unfortunately, sometimes common sense, as they say, is not necessarily very common. So, Jeremy, what are your thoughts on kind of the lawlessness of Philadelphia? What's going on these campuses?
Just to follow up on what I think Bill very succinctly stated. You think back historically to a time when folks stayed quiet, and Dave touched on this with Senator Casey. Staying quiet about such horrific behavior, targeting a specific group. And listen, it's Jews today, it's blacks tomorrow, it's Hispanics the next week. That has been the historical timeline when you talk about oppression of people. And not saying something is as good as endorsing it in many camps, and that has been historically proven. So what Dave is doing in terms of really getting out there, and what Bill did as U.S. Attorney, I mean, it wasn't popular, especially in this city, right? And we see that now with the prosecutors we have leading the charge, because there is no charge, where they're not seeing the victims of the crime. We all agree there's a First Amendment, and that has to be protected. But it's not the message, it's the manner in which that message is being delivered. And what that is doing is that's harming people. The unseen victims are students that won't go to class because they're terrified. Students who believe that, and my daughter went to Penn, and she is entirely shocked by what's going on, where the mission of Penn seems not to be about education, but has now become a mission of let a particular group have the forum to the extent that no one else can have the space they need. So I think that what Dave is speaking about is exactly what we need to have. We need to have that accountability. We need to have someone who's not afraid to step forward and say, what you're doing is wrong, and we need prosecutors like Bill who are willing to take those folks under the laws that we have, the civil rights laws that we have that don't allow you to intimidate people based on their religion, based on their race, based on their political affiliation.
Well, and as you were talking, some of what you're saying, it was a flashback to 2020, because what I heard often in 2020 was silence is violence. And a lot of these leaders who would say that in 2020, I don't hear them coming out and saying anything now. It's so I feel like their silence is violence. And I thank Dave for his leadership. As an Irish Catholic who is married to a Jewish woman, I thank you, because she's, on social media, she oftentimes would tell me, don't talk about me and our daughters. My daughters are Catholic, but don't talk about us being Jewish, because right now I'm afraid, and I don't want that out there. And as a community leader, a lot of people do read what I say and listen to what I say. She said, Drew, put a pause on that, because I always talk about my family. Right. I'm always talking about my family. So we're here with business leaders, so I'm going to jump right into that, and we're going to talk about, obviously, there's a lot of effects that happen in the city of Philadelphia. If you did ask a person in Philadelphia what the top 3 issues that you want to talk about and think about and affect you, it would be number 1 is crime, number 2 is crime, and number 3 is crime. But number 4 would be inflation, and that's what I want to talk to the business leaders that are here today, because inflation is now, it's crippling us. So I'm going to start with Lisa. What is inflation? What is this economy doing to your small business?
Well, for us, it's getting the goods. The goods are not there. And just some of the supplies you just can't get. So that's a big problem for us. And we kind of make do with what we can do, but really it's very.
So you're still seeing a lot of supply chain issues, even with.
A lot of supply chain issues, yes. But we do the best we can. We try to steer people towards something else, and it kind of works sometimes. But
sure.
Yeah.
But it's tough.
It's tough. Yes.
It's tough. It's tougher than it used to be.
Yeah.
So.
And the crime, I used to lock my door, and you had to ring a doorbell to get in. I stopped doing that because the people that are moving into the neighborhood are fairly decent people. But yeah, it's, crime's terrible,
How about you, Alicia? What is inflation and we keep going back to this crime. What is inflation and crime doing to your business?
So for us, being that we're 3rd generation, I think Santucci's has endured historically similar, economic and inflation history. So obviously it's repeating itself. For us, cost of goods is up. Cost of labor is up. We started franchising the brand in 2020. So for our franchisees, they've seen SBA rates their interest rates on their SBAs have almost doubled at times. So it's enduring obviously as a business owner, we can't just endure it. We obviously have to put those costs back onto the consumer. And I feel like that's where it's unfair because I have, through the last few years, as we raise prices, if something comes down, nobody's lowering the price to the consumer. Sure. So this inflation is just going to continue. And it's truly unfair to the end user. In our opinion.
Yeah, and you have to raise if your cost structure goes up,
absolutely,
you have to make a profit. You're a small business,
yeah,
so the cost of the end user has to go up.
Unfortunately, you've seen, the weaker business owners are the ones that have closed their doors between COVID and now this new inflation. Luckily for us, I think the strength is that we've been able to endure it for so many years, and we just have to keep our nose to the grind and make sure that we're, putting out a good product, putting out a good service. But ultimately, you feel bad for your employees because they are the end users. Sure. So they're making, sometimes slightly more than minimum wage, but then they're incurring the cost of all these products. And it's hard. It's not just cost of goods, it's cost of insurance, it's cost of, licenses in Philadelphia. It's everything across the board. I mean, for most business owners, they're not making much more than their employees.
Vincent, how about you? And I think you might talk more about crime than maybe inflation, but both are affecting you.
But the inflation part is also affecting our small business. The small business people are regular people who gets up and goes to work every day and dealing with all the problems 24 hours a day. They're not millionaires. They're just regular people going to work every day. They send their kids to school, pay the rent, and pay taxes, and that's what you see. But the problem is lately, the labor has gone up to the point that it's impossible because some people are offering $26 and some people are offering minimum. And the moment that you hire somewhat a decent person, the next person comes up and says, oh, I'll give you this much more. Why don't you come and work for me? That kind of stuff, it's just like you're fighting for employees here, and that has just driven the cost so much high. On the interest rates, just like she was saying, and the interest rates are going up, and the inventory, we are borrowing money to buy more inventory and keep it going like that. On the financial end of it, we're not really making any money. That's what it is. If you ask me the truth, that is but all this year is like so much worse than years before. That is what's happening.
Senator, what are your thoughts on the economy and inflation, what you see in Iowa?
Well, I do see so much of this, and every one of our business owners is very reflective of what I see and hear across Iowa as well. Whether it is the inventory challenges, so we still have supply chain disruption. The interest rates obviously are going to be a challenge for a number of people, especially for new business owners that are having trouble tapping into capital. But seriously, inflation driven by overspending at the federal level is really one of the largest contributing factors there. And as a federal government, we really have to rein in our spending. But overall as well, and something that Alicia, you tapped into, was overregulation and permitting. And how can we enable those small businesses to be successful? We've got to pull back on some of that government regulation. So one thing that I hear so much about from our small business owners is that I'm required to submit the same level of paperwork as a large corporation. I'm subjected to the same federal regulation that larger employers are subjected to. But it's just me and my daughter that run our business. I don't have an HR department. So I'm being pulled away for hours on end to fill out paper after paper after paper. I'm not putting that time and attention into my business. So I can't grow and develop a business when I'm challenged with all of this overregulation. So we have to be smart as a federal government, making sure that we are giving our small businesses a leg up and not hampering them. So Dave touched upon something as well, which I think is incredibly smart and why I think just he will be an incredible leader at the federal level. But basically, he said to say, prove it. Okay, if you have a federal agency that's pushing out regulation that they say is not going to affect small businesses, prove it. Show us that this regulation is not going to shut down small business. And I agree, and I've been on that kick, and I'm glad that we're going to have a great partnership in the United States Senate. So I think that's really, really important. Labor pool as well. We've got to get more folks engaged in the labor force. Part of that is childcare. We have a lot of folks that don't engage in the workforce because they can't find childcare. And so that's something else that we're working on as well. But there's a lot of challenges out there that everyday America is facing. And we have an administration, they don't get it. They don't get it. You know, when you're not getting out into middle America, you're not coming out to Philadelphia, you're not getting out into the rural areas to talk to people, you're not going to learn what's challenging them. And I don't hear that President Biden's doing that. I don't hear that some of these Senate challengers like Bob Casey, I haven't heard that he goes out and speaks to people in the rural areas or other communities. So listening to our small business owners is incredibly important, and then addressing the root cause of some of these issues. We need to step up.
Sure.
We need different leadership.
And we keep hearing the economy is great, but I don't think the middle class, with inflation and the way the economy is going, I don't think they feel like the economy is great. So Dave, what are your thoughts on the economy and inflation and how it's affecting everyday Americans?
Well, it is ironic to listen to President Biden and Senator Casey talk about Bidenomics working. And for most Pennsylvanians, it's not working. So 60% of Pennsylvanians live paycheck to paycheck. For them, under Biden and Casey, prices have gone up by more than 20%. Wages have gone up by a lot less. And so they're getting squeezed on food, fuel, and rent. And if you want to buy a new pickup truck, the payment's 60% more. If you want to buy a new home, you were saying SBA loans. If you want to buy a new home, the interest rates are about twice what they were. New home sales for $250,000 homes and below are down 25%. And that's because of that. And that's the direct result of policy. And what's happened is you have, Republicans and Democrats alike have been guilty of spending too much over the last 20 years. But under Joe Biden, it's been a hockey stick. $6 trillion of new spending. That, combined with a war on fossil fuels, has driven up the price of fuel. And so these are the direct result of choices that President Biden made and choices that Bob Casey have supported. And so, the simplest way to fix the inflation problem, it's going to take a while, but is to undo the Biden economic policies, which is to reduce the spending, pull back on even some of those bills that were passed. The Inflation Reduction Act couldn't be a bigger misnomer. It's been the Inflation Creation Act, not the Inflation Reduction Act, and unlock our fossil fuel industry in a way that's good for the environment and in a way that really benefits Pennsylvania. And so that is going to be that theme of an economic environment that allows small businesses to grow and policies that allow us to unlock energy in Pennsylvania. That's sort of the core of what my agenda will be in the Senate.
So I think we've heard from everyone except my good friend, Josh Novotny over here. And he's probably looking at me like, all right, Drew, when are you going to get to me? So Josh is a good friend of mine. He's very much like me. He's a community leader down in South Philly. So what are you hearing down in South Philly, Josh, from your neighbors, from businesses? What do they need from leaders, government leaders, to move forward? And what are the biggest challenges down in South Philly?
Great question, Drew. I think to echo what Dave and the Senator were saying, there's a lot of problems, a lot of headwinds for people that just want to live their life, right? The frustration, I think, is something to point out. It's something, the crime in the past few years has not gone away, it's gotten worse, right? The inflation has gotten worse. They're yelling, they're screaming, it's vocal, and they're not being heard by anyone in Washington. So I think that is the main takeaway, is a lot of people are frustrated and they're trying to be vocal and they are not being heard.
And not being heard by probably a lot of our local leaders here either.
Yeah.
So now this is a question, but it's going to be to probably all of you. Why is it important? And we'll start with the Senator and Dave. Why is it important that we do have business leaders in Washington and not just career politicians, people who know what it takes to go out every day and earn that living. Why is that important to have that down in Washington?
You are reflective of the people you represent. And that is incredibly important. And just as you want a soldier, someone who was a soldier, to serve on the Armed Services Committee, you will want someone who has been involved in business and industry, knows the inner workings of business and industry, working maybe on the Commerce Committee. So many different aspects of daily lives of people here in Pennsylvania are better reflected by people that come from within those communities. And when you have served in Washington, D.C., and you haven't maintained those relationships in your community, you haven't walked in the shoes of your neighbor for a very long time, it's hard to go forward and propose smart solutions that reflect your neighbor's values. So I am just so excited about Dave taking his level of expertise and sharing that with Pennsylvanians in our Senate. Again, incredibly important to do that. We all want to do the right thing for our neighbors, our communities. But if you have disassociated from your community, again, you can't serve people in that manner.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with the senator more, but it's also if you've never been in the private sector, you might get lulled into a sense of thinking that the government creates jobs, the government creates economic growth. The government doesn't do any of those things. It's people like you that create jobs. It's you that creates economic growth. And so if your entire life is government, then you can be lulled into a sense that government's the answer. When you're in the private sector and you've had to create jobs and you've had to make payroll and you've had to deal with regulators and all the burden that come with that, then you have an appreciation for what it takes to unlock the dynamism of our economy. So one of the things that's been remarkable about America is that our business community, our free enterprise system, has been the greatest in the world, the most competitive in the world. And so we've got to make sure that we don't have public officials that are increasingly creating more burden on business, more burden on job creators, more burden on people like all of you, because they don't know any better. And what's happening right now with inflation could not be a better example. The inflation is the result of bad policies that are directed by the Biden administration and by Bob Casey. And now Bob Casey thinks the problem is greedflation. And so what he's saying is government should dictate how many potato chips you put into a bag because the portions are shrinking. When you see government, if all you know is government, you think government's the answer. And so that's why I think it's so important that we don't destroy the goose that laid the golden egg. The goose that laid the golden egg for the greatest economy in the world are people like you that have created these businesses and created these jobs, and we need to have people that understand that.
Sure. And any other thoughts from anyone else on having people who actually know business to represent us in Washington?
There are people who come into the store and ask, when we offer them a job, they tell you that, you know what, I cannot work more than 14 hours because if I take work more than that, they will take away my health insurance. What kind of stuff is that? How about offering insurance to the people who work full time, rather than people they limit you like, oh no, I can only work. So they're so careful, they don't go overboard because their insurance goes away. How about offering the same privileges and benefits to the people who work full time for a change?
Right. I'd just like to say too, I think it's about leadership. Successful business leaders are leaders, right? People like Dave have inspired people, created jobs, set priorities, created successful organizations, as opposed to career politicians, which are creatures that are dedicated to their own self-preservation. They're not true leaders. So I think we need leaders like Dave, leaders like Joni in the Senate.
Coming to Philadelphia, you realize something about Philadelphia fans. If you get hired to play or coach in Philadelphia, the fan base knows their football, right? With someone who does not have a background in business, in building anything, in seeing what goes on with just the most minute problems in job creation, being put in a position of having to create policies, it just doesn't make any sense. I mean, it's common, it's first grade knowledge right there. It just doesn't make any sense. And it would seem to me that someone who has had experience serving one's country, not just in the military, but also as an undersecretary, and then going out and creating jobs upon jobs. And what those jobs mean, you know, when we say jobs, and I've worked a lot in the Latino community, jobs mean that mom and dad have food on the table. It means that the kids have clothing. It means an entire quality of life that gets enhanced because of jobs, not because of someone who does not have that experience. And to me, it's crucial as a Pennsylvanian that whoever is my senator is a senator that has created jobs. And right now, we don't have that at all. And that's an incredible void that has to be filled. And one person that can do it right now is Dave, because he has a track record. I mean, there's some good points, there's some bad points, but that's the life of creating jobs. It's not necessarily a honeymoon the entire time. You're gonna make decisions you didn't want to make, or you would wish you could take back. At the end of the day, though, look at how many jobs were created and how many people benefited from that. Not just in our state, but in so many states.
Absolutely. All right, I think we're starting to wrap up here, so I'm gonna turn it over to the senator just for some closing remarks and thoughts on
Thank
your end, and
you.
then we'll conclude with Dave.
Well, I really do appreciate the opportunity to be here with everyone, and I want to thank all of the panelists today so much for their service, for participating and sharing your personal story. I'll address a couple of issues that were brought up, and Vincent, you made an incredible point about those that come in want a job, but they can only work so many hours. Why? Because the federal government has it structured that way. Instead of having really solid plans to work people up out of poverty, we keep them as a federal government with a system that has been backed by President Joe Biden and our Senate Democrats. We keep these folks living comfortably in poverty. Instead of aiding and assisting them up so they can work into a full-time job where there's plenty of opportunity for advancement, we keep them where they are. That has to change. And then you will see greater participation in our workforce. But it's got to start with initiatives brought forward by smart leaders in the Republican Party. So thank you for bringing that forward. And then for everyone that feels those burdens of regulatory pressures, this administration under Joe Biden has put an additional $400 billion of regulatory costs on our small businesses just in the past 3.5 years. $400 billion. That is not going to wage increases for your employees. It's not going towards employee benefits. It's not going to greater inventory on your shelves. It's all going where? To the federal government and keeping up with regulation. So we have to have a change. Dave McCormick is that necessary change. Strong leadership is what we need. So thank you again for allowing me to participate. Thank you.
Dave, why
Yeah,
don't you
just
wrap it up?
Just to echo
Yes.
what the senator said. Thank you. Thank you all for being here. Thank you all for your commitment to getting our government back on track. And thank you for your commitment to being part of this effort. And, you know, I'll just end with a simple thing. I think we really, when I say shake up Washington, when we say shake up Washington, we mean ensure that Washington is serving the people. That's what it means. So when I'm saying shake it up, I think we all are feeling like it's not serving the people. And I think to serve the people well, you have to care. You have to care, first and foremost. You have to listen. You have to listen in places like this to understand what's going on. You have to really be able to internalize that and understand it based on not only what you're hearing, but what you understand about how the world works. And then you have to be fearless about going to Washington and making a difference. And so, you know, my promise to all of you is if I'm fortunate enough to be in the Senate, that I'll care, I'll listen, I'll understand, and I'll be fearless. And And I think that's what we need to make a difference. And so thank you all for being here. Thanks for all of you in the audience for participating. And it's really a pleasure. Thank you. Well moderated.
Thank you, Dean. Thank you, Senator. And thank you to all the panels for taking time to come out today.
Wonderful.